Vladimir Putin has clearly gone crazy and it's having ramifications across the rest of the world. We don't want to trade with a madman, of course, unless we have to. Meanwhile, China is creating ructions in international supply chains still because of their zero COVID philosophy. So doesn't this mean we need to reduce our reliance on other nations? Hasn't that been the big learning curve of the last few years? And doesn't that mean making more at home? But is this fortress mentality the right way to go? And even if it was, is it actually possible? Just how self-sufficient can a Western nation become? Can developed nations really reindustrialize? Or has the damage already been done? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. Now, the world seems to be dividing into two or maybe three blocks. We've got the West, we've got the autocracies like Russia and China, and then we've got emerging nations who I guess could jump on either side of the divide, but increasingly seem to be tempted to take Chinese money if none is forthcoming from the West. So that is my very simple take of where we are right now. The question is, how do we all survive in those blocks? First of all, Steve, though, is that how you see it? Can you see us going this far, that the West and Russia and China sort of separate out and we do less together, or perhaps even do nothing at all?
Well, I'm certainly seeing us doing less. I mean, I didn't have a land war in Europe on my bingo card for 2022. So some things take you totally by surprise. But certainly the anti-China and anti-Russian rhetoric, which has been coming out of America for ages now, is not going to turn away. What you've really got is a classic great power 19th century style conflict there. China does want to extend its influence. America does want to stop them. Russia wants to have more influence. Obviously, America wants to stop them. And you get these standoffs that mean you can't do the sort of trade deals that it obviously existed between America and China over the last 40 years. And yet those trade deals and the incredibly low prices they generate are a large part of Western consumption these days.
Well, I hate to say, you begin to wonder, don't you, whether Donald Trump was right with his concerns about China, because, of course, they have jumped on the Russian side of the fence, if they're taking any side at all. And, and there's going to be repercussions from that. But, I mean, we can't do without trade with China.
Yeah, well, they can also take the sidelines. I mean, China, there's an old joke about once, I think it was Kissinger talking to Chow En-lai and asked him what he thought about Western civilization, and Chow said it's too early to tell. That may have been actually a reference to the 1973 French riots at the time, so we're not sure he's actually making a long-term joke. But in the sense of trying to build long-term relationships and maintain a tribute flow to China out of those long-term relationships, that has been China's behaviour for a hell of a long time, centuries, millennia. And so they want to expand their influence, and the Americans just don't like it. The country that is all for democracy and freedom and the rest of the world wants to maintain influence there as well, and somebody else can't have that influence. So they're so much for democracy. But yeah, what you've got is real old style, real world imperial power conflict.
Yeah. Aside from that, we've also got the issue that, going forwards, are we going to trust many of our trading partners, or are we going to start to say, well, no, we need to, the combination of this plus obviously the impact of COVID and what that's had on supply chains, do we need to become more self-sufficient? And if that is the case, then surely we have to look at the proportion of GDP which is made up of imports. I mean, that becomes a figure that we want to see get lower, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and this was in some ways always going to happen, because conventional economic theory pushed us towards so-called comparative advantage. Now, that's not at all what happened, because if it was comparative advantage, Japan would be exporting silks to America and America would be exporting cars to Japan. So it's a total cover. It's a load of garbage. And Dean Baker has a nice little piece in his column, which I recommend people take a look at, saying the whole comparative advantage is really about reducing workers' wages. And that's what was done by the relocation of American production from America to China. I've got a piece I just published in my little Epoch Times column, pointing out that that's what was one of the main factors driving prices down since the 80s. It was the increase in Chinese industrialization on low wages and exporting back to the West. And that's given us both a very incredibly low cost structure, but an incredibly long supply chain and something dependent upon it not being disturbed. And hey, hello COVID and hello climate change. So I can see all those international links being snapped in the next 10 to 15 years.
Well, we've sort of accepted in the past, haven't we, that, if you import a great deal, it doesn't matter so long as you export a great deal. That's why, Germany has been quite happy with an import level, which is 40% of GDP. In the United States, it's only 15%. In the UK, 30%. But, because the conventional thinking was, well, that's okay, so long as you're doing well with exports. But in the age of increasing self-sufficiency, presumably exports become less important and the level of imports much more significant factor for you.
Yeah, and the trouble is that we're massively into overshoot on our use of the Earth's resources. So, and yet those resources are scattered all over the planet. So you have things like lithium, for example. I think the world's major deposits are Chile, Australia, and China in that order. And of course, you therefore want to be able to buy the lithium because it's an essential input to batteries, and which is an essential part of the technological world we've come to live in the last 20, 30 years. So semiconductors are almost all made in Taiwan. So we've got this incredibly specialized global production chain, and yet it's when we start seeing climate change coming along as well as, and COVID's given us a dry run for that supply chain breaks down. You can't get the parts you need. And if you want to have those parts, you've got to build them domestically. But then even at that level, there are, the UK doesn't have any deposits of lithium. Europe in general, I think, has one or two significant lithium deposits there, and maybe new technology might be able to extract some more. But when you aggregate up our total, if we wanted to go from a fossil fuel-based economy, which we have right now, and we're forced to go to what Simon Marchal calls a mineral-based economy, where you use solar cells and wind turbines and other mechanical techniques to extract energy from the sun or the environment. We don't have the minerals or any stretch of imagination to maintain the level of society we have right now.
I wonder if we can do without them, though. I wonder if we can find an alternative way, where the technology. But that's a very dangerous, way to look at it.
Well, for example, like you and I've got caught up in the solar versus nuclear conversation quite a few times, and I've got a lot of engineer supporters on Patreon who are pro-nuclear, but the thing they're pro-nuclear with small reactors. Well, how many small reactors are in existence right now outside of American nuclear submarines? Not a lot. And even though it's that the plumbing side of things is straightforward in building these things, there's the scaling up of the extraction, the mining of uranium, and you need the extra skills, and you need to cross in different countries. If we're forced into an autarkic regime, which I think I can see are coming, we're not going to have that capacity to make that switch in less than 15 years.
And what about...
we've got to try, but we won't get there in 15 years. And it's the timing issue that's going to really undo us.
And yet, I think, the experience of the last few years has been two things that every country needs is energy security and food security. So Germany certainly feeling that need for energy security right now. But if we look at food as well, so the UK imports almost half of the food it consumes, 46%. The biggest suppliers are not where you'd think. Well, I know one of those big suppliers because you live there.
I do, yeah.
It's the Netherlands, Germany.
I'll put my clogs on, yeah.
Germany as well, Ireland for potatoes presumably, and France. I don't know, cheese and croissant. But the Netherlands, they are the second biggest agricultural and food exporter in the world. Meat, dairy,
it's bizarre,
eggs.
Isn't it? That's one of the reasons, not the only reason. It was when I found out that was going to happen, I was extremely pleased about making a move to the Netherlands, where I'm now selling, unfortunately. But yeah, the Netherlands
the only thing I can find that suggests that is that the reason why they do that. It's a lot of it is automation and those big greenhouses that we've all seen. But on the basis of all of that, they've got very fertile soil because of the lowlands. But they've got 20,000 square kilometres of agricultural land in the Netherlands. In the UK, we've got half of that in just two counties, Norfolk and Suffolk, also flat land, just on the other side of the sea, a lot closer to London. You'd be thinking, if they can do it, why can't the UK do it?
And that's what the UK should be looking at, frankly, because you are going to need food security and energy security. Energy security, to some extent, the UK could get that out of the wind turbines, and you've got some nuclear power stations. You can expand that to some degree, so you can do it. But if you don't make it a priority, you're going to find the situation that Poland finds itself in now, where it's had its gas supply cut off. And that's definitely Ukraine-related, obviously. But yeah, it's energy security and food security are paramount. And the Netherlands has shown it can be done on a very small amount of land, and the UK should definitely be learning from that.
Right, so how quickly could UK do that, and who's going to pay for it? But more importantly, energy security. Can we really turn off the taps from Russia? And if we look towards a green future, can we actually develop our own energy supplies without resorting to getting mineral resources from autocratic regimes? We'll look at all of that in the full version of this podcast. To do that, you need to become a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen, or you can find us as well at debunkingeconomics.com. I'm Phil Dobbie, back with Steve Keen again next week for another one. Thanks for listening.